Dobra, kto by się spodziewał, że czas płynie i w Elden Ring DLC pojawiają się kolejne crazy, niesamowite, chore odkrycia i kolejne sekrety, które należałoby zbadać. Także zobaczmy, nowy materiał od Storma, pseudonapisy z dziwnymi tłumaczeniami odpalone, a ja jestem ciekawy, czy coś mnie tutaj zaskoczy.
Alright, what's going on, guys? Over the past month, we have been picking apart Shadow of the Erdtree to the most minute detail, finding every little gameplay secret, fascinating lore discoveries,
Bardzo mi się podobał ostatni gdzieś tam z tych ciekawostek, na przykład taki szczegół, że posąg Mariki ma uwalony fragment włosów i potem ten fragment włosów jest jako talizman i w każdym posągu Mariki to też jest widoczne i w ogóle, nie wiem, wszystko w tym świecie, nawet wizualnie, w najmniejszych szczegółach się łączy.
interesting facts that you probably didn't know about Elden Ring's DLC. And today we have 8 more mind-blowing things to
Grzyby,
share,
teoria
and you know how
grzybowa.
these videos work. If I show you something today that you didn't already know about the game, then be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe for all things Elden Ring.
Dokładnie, widzowie, jeżeli w tym materiale pojawi się coś, o czym nie mieliście pojęcia, albo macie coś, czym chcecie się podzielić, bo inni mogą nie mieć pojęcia, zostawcie to w komentarzu, ja chętnie sobie poczytam.
But with all that, let's not waste any time and get straight into the first one. Let's begin today by talking about Mesmer, the poster child of the DLC. We learn a lot about this character, how he was a demigod cast aside, removed from the records
Ciekawa
of
postać,
history,
szczerze.
and given the duty to subjugate the Land of Shadow by his mother, Queen Marika. But when we first encounter Mesmer entering his boss room, he will call us a mongrel intruder, noting that we are tarnished, and questioning why we would be the Lord of the Old Age, granted favor by Queen Marika. But did you know? In the files for this cutscene, the text of Mesmer's dialogue contains an extra line that further contextualizes how he knows about us. It reads, "Mongrel intruder, Mikola spoke of thee. Thou
A, widzisz, tego nie ma chyba.
art tarnished, it seemeth," with the version we get in the final release of the DLC, removing the line about Mikola. Now, I find this really interesting because had it not been cut, it would have at least confirmed somewhat of a relationship between Mikola and Mesmer. Obviously beyond
Zobaczcie, że jest dużo rzeczy, które jakby Miyazaki wrzuca do gry podstawowo i planuje nam wyrazić, a potem wycina je celowo, zostawiając dziury, które musimy sami rozkminić i uzupełnić.
them being siblings, it would have been an acknowledgement that is currently lacking. Because when we follow the trail of Mikola, it takes us through the Shadow Keep. We find a cross in there, where he divested a bit of his flesh. So I think it would make sense that they crossed paths at least once. But of course this line was cut for a reason. But let me now raise the question to you. What do you think that reason was? And should it have been cut? But as we play through Elden Ring, one thing we get a good look at is the vision of George Martin, who wrote the basis for the game's story. And if you're a fan of
George Martin, czyli cudowny człowiek, który stworzył drzewo genealogiczne, w którym dzieje się wszystko, dosłownie.
his work, as I'm sure many of you
I nikt
are,
go nie
you'll want
rozumie.
to check out the sponsor of today's video, Game of Thrones Legends.
Mega.
Rana is one of the best bosses in Elden Ring's DLC. Definitely a top 3 in my opinion. And even though she is accessible to find,
Relana jest spoko. Dużo ludzi mówi, że irytujący jest fakt, że nie ma żadnej cutscenki. I szczerze, dziwi mnie to, że w DLC-ku jest tak mało cutscenek do bossów, jakichś specjalnych kwestii. Jakoś tak, kurczę, po prostu są te bossy. Dlatego nieraz mam takie dziwne odczucie. Ono nie jest negatywne, ale ono jest dziwne, że gram w moda, a nie w DLC-ka.
very early on, she can be a pretty tough battle given her long combos and quick moves. Now I'm sure you all are well aware that you can skip Rana and access the portion of the map behind her fight by taking a path through the river and coming up around the south.
No, możesz mieć totalnie wywalone w Relanę. I co więcej, wystarczy, że zrobisz 3 bossy, żeby przejść tę grę, nie? Mesmer, Romina, Radan, siemanko.
This will give you
No i
access
Leda
to
po
the
drodze.
high road cross side of
Możesz
Grace,
skipnąć
right on the
kompletnie.
other side of R'Lana's arena, where you'll find the back entrance covered with a golden fog wall. Now, since she is just sitting on the other side of this fog wall, did you know
Czy to jest ten cheese, którym możesz użyć płomienia Boga upadłego i zabić Relanę, nie wchodząc na jej arenę od tyłu podchodząc?
that this gives you the opportunity to cheese her boss fight? And one of the ways to accomplish this is with Flame of the Fell God, which floats towards targets and explodes, leaving
tak
a pool
głupie,
of fire.
ale
So if you
patrzcie.
cast this at the back fog wall, it will go straight through, then float all the way over to R'Lana and explode, also causing residual damage with the fire. So if you load up on some flask of cerulean tears, then you can just sit here and pop them off for about 2 minutes, and eventually it will be enough to kill her. Now I definitely
Można.
don't recommend doing this. If you haven't already beaten R'Lana legit, because she's a great fight, don't rob yourself of the experience. But if you're gonna do a playthrough and want either her armor or her swords, you're
ciekawostka ode mnie, nie wiem czy tutaj zostanie poruszona, w update'cie, który zmieniał głównie balans gierki, usuwał bugi i tak dalej, został dodany tron w tej sali, gdzie Relana sobie chilluje bombę i czeka na ciebie, jest walka normalnie, także jest tam krzesełko specjalne dla niej, które można rozwalić jak u Morgota.
early on, then this is a great way to get them. Now, just as a side note, this will not work at the front fog wall because the fireball will
daleko.
collide with the door and explode. So you do have to take the alternate path. But
Ale zobacz, tutaj się zabezpieczyli na to, a tam nie. Jestem ciekawy, czy oni te rzeczy zostawiają celowo, czy zapominają o nich, nie myślą o tych rozwiązaniach.
overall, I think this is a pretty cool interaction. My personal favorite character from Elden Ring's DLC is Sir Ansbach.
Jezu, Ansbach jest takim szefem, on jest takim koksem. Jedna z ciekawszych i takich postaci, które po prostu się szanuje. Gigaczadem.
Devout follower of Mohg, who fell victim to Miquella's enchantment. But after Miquella breaks his great rune and the enchantment is undone, he tells us something very interesting.
Once, in an attempt to free Lord Mohg from his enchantment, I challenged tender Miquella, only to have my own heart rather artfully stolen.
Aha.
I knew not how weak I was. I believed that with sufficient mastery, even an Empyrean would be within reach of my blade.
Czyli widzisz, Ansbach był takim szefem, że pomyślał, że jest w stanie niebianina napieprzyć swoją kosą, ale coś nie pykło. Michaela w ogóle jest jednym z ciekawszych, powiedzmy, villainów, jakich stworzono ostatnio w grach, bo on wszystkim wydaje się jako taki delikatny i niewinny, a fakty są takie, że to on sprawił bardzo dużo krzywdy i bólu ludziom swoim urokiem. To jest bardzo, bardzo ciekawy design złego charakteru. Złe występki wyraża poprzez teoretycznie dobre rzeczy.
More mistaken. Miquella the Kind is a monster.
But we get further context about this confrontation from Leda, who tells us,
I'm afraid Sir Ansbach will have to be next. He insists that he's nothing but a worn-down, over-the-hill soldier. But in his day, he was the feared commander of the pure-blood knights, who cleaved open Miquella the Kind with his blood blade. He claims he
Michał K. Teraz spojrzałem na napisy, beka w sumie.
has the spirit to take up his sword again, but I doubt it'll be very long before he recalls, as I have, the cascading sheets of blood. I'm afraid he cannot be left to fester.
So Ansbach tells us that he lost to Miquella, having his heart artfully stolen. But Leda says that he managed to cleave Miquella open, and there were cascading sheets of blood. So we're left to wonder, when did this happen? And is there currently...
Czyli udało mu się zranić Mikelę, ale nie wygrał pojedynku. To i tak Ansbach jest gigaczadem, jak udało mu się w ogóle, wiesz, jakkolwiek coś w pojedynku osiągnąć.
any evidence in the game of their battle? Well, there may be, because when we see Miquella in the final fight, one thing you may or may not have noticed is that he's missing an arm.
Nie strzeliłem się. Co ty opowiadasz?
Shown that it's cut off right above the elbow. We can see this very clearly when we look at the model as showcased by Modifier
tego.
here. And there are a few things to note, namely that even though Miquella discarded many parts of his body throughout the DLC, we can still see that he's not missing any of them. He still has his eyes, and we find multiple crosses
Ty,
within this.
jest szansa, że Ansbach mu rękę uwalił. On ma 4 ręce? No tak, to widziałem i mówię, no dobra, rozumiem ten status, to tak jak wiesz, z Rani i tak dalej. No to chyba taki, to jest ten symbol porzucenia swojego ciała, tak mi się wydaje, bo Rani też to miała, tylko w innej formie. I jakiejś tam tej boskości potencjalnej, jako niebianin. Ale bardziej jestem w szoku, że faktycznie nie ma tej ręki. Nie skapnąłem się, nie zauważyłem tego.
Discarding his arms, so this has to be the result of something else. So, did Sir Ansbach cut off Miquella's arm? Well, it sure seems like it. But you guys let me know what you think.
Zarąbiste.
But building off of that, when Miquella breaks his great rune, it ends up in the possession of something else, the Shadow Tree Avatar. And we're left to wonder how this sinister sunflower ended up with Miquella's great rune. It may have something to do with the fact that, like Miquella himself, the Shadow Tree Avatar appears to have one arm.
Dobra, to jest chore. Stary, i tutaj też masz jedno uwalone jakby. Nie wiem. No i powiesz mi, że Miyazaki nie dba o szczegóły, nie? To spójrz chociaż 5 sekund na takie rzeczy.
cut off slightly. There are a lot of mysteries around this thing, but one notable feature about its design are the eyes we see on the flower itself. Unlike
To wygląda
any
jak galaktyka,
sunflower
nie?
I've ever
Jakaś.
seen, there are these glowing orange dots, and while at first they may appear disorderly,
Czy tam
did you know that they happen to
mały
line
wóz.
up very closely with the Pleiades constellation? Now, while if we trace the stars one for one with the dots, there are a few discrepancies, the shape is almost identical. And if we add in minor stars, then we can make the exact pattern seen on the Shadow Tree avatar. Now, From Software may have just made this design out of cool factor, but it wouldn't be the first time the Pleiades is mentioned in Elden Ring, as in the 1.0 version of the game, the name for the Stars of Ruin spell was Pleiades.
No,
Now,
widzisz.
while I still struggle to find an exact reason of
To jest raz, a dwa, Galaktyka Pingwin wygląda jak Elden Beast, nie? Więc mi się wydaje, że Miyazaki sporo czerpie z jakiegoś tam, wiesz, astrologicznego punktu widzenia.
why this constellation is
ciekawostek i
significant to the
designów.
Shadow Tree avatar, a theory I can imagine that may tie into it having Miquella's Great Rune is that what we're seeing here is a representation of amber stars. This is of course an amber-colored constellation, and we know very well from the base game that amber stars guide the fates of the gods. We've even seen it directly in reference to Miquella. So what I think happened here is that the Shadow Tree avatar was born of Miquella's divested fate, and that's what the Pleiades constellation on its flower represents. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think of that.
No właśnie, u Metyr jeszcze jest dźwięk jakiejś tam czarnej dziury, tak? Chyba w jej muzyce na boss fight'cie. Także no, tam jest czerpane sporo inspiracji z tego.
Next, did you know that the spirit worms in the Shadowlands can be affected by frenzy? Yeah, I didn't either, but I tested
Co?
it and it's real. Now, they don't actually get afflicted with madness in the same way that a player does, but if you watch their health bar, they take the big chunk of damage from the status proccing in
No.
the same way that a player would. That shouldn't happen to non-player type enemies, and I did go and test this on a wide variety of other enemy types, and I can guarantee that
to
it
ciekawe
didn't
jest.
happen for any of them. They just took the regular damage
Ciekawe,
of
czy jest to przypadek i po prostu coś zostawione programistycznie, czy też jakieś nawiązanie do tego, że ma to wspólność, jest to wspólne, zbieżne z jakimś człowieczeństwem.
Shabriri's Howl. And the same is true for other humanoid enemy types. Non-player enemy types are not supposed to have this proc. Now, if you want a potential lore explanation for why this happens, we did learn in the DLC that Frenzied Flame is one of the only things that can completely burn away spirits. But with that lore, I went and tested it on the spirit jellyfish, and there was no proc. So while in all reality this is likely a glitch, it hasn't been patched yet, and it does work with the lore that
Często jest tak, że jak masz pewne glitche, to twórcy, nawet będąc ich świadomymi, zostawiają je, albo żeby po prostu była jakaś łatwość rozgrywki, bo na przykład przydatne to jest, albo czasami okazuje się, że jest to zupełnie celowy zabieg. Bo to nie jest tak, że oni nie mają świadomości o tym, że coś takiego występuje, ale Miyazaki albo to zamierzał zostawić, albo stwierdził, że zostawi.
that's been established in the DLC so far, I say keep it in. I think it's pretty cool. Now, one question that I've been getting on every single one of these videos is what happens when you power stance Rellana's twin blades. Now, I'm sure you know the standard moveset of this weapon, with simply using it in one hand, granting you the one-handed moveset of the Light Greatsword,
No.
and the Power Stance Light Greatsword moveset when two-handing the twin blades, and in this stance, using your guard
Dzięki,
button
Vox, za
allows you
Prima.
to attack with the left-handed blade. But you may be surprised to learn that you can actually power stance two of these, and it does change the moveset.
Co
Now,
ty
it will
gadasz?
give you the left-handed blade in the left hand. You can't have two of the magic swords, unfortunately, but this will let you use the block button as your power stance attack like it normally would be when power stancing other weapons, and on top of that, you get the right-handed attack, as if you were using it in one hand for your light attack.
Fajnie.
Also, this makes you have the other two blades on your back, which looks really cool. So in addition to opening up new combo potentials,
To trochę
it
jak
just
z tymi
looks
mieczami
awesome.
Radana,
Now,
nie?
since each of these swords does a different elemental damage, there is reason to use the power stance version over the regular version, if you prefer the moveset and the range of the magic sword over the fire one. And in case you were wondering, yes, this does work for Radan's swords as well, but it kinda looks ridiculous with how many swords there are. And there isn't really a practical advantage to having these power stance over just using the regular version, but hey, if you want more sword than character, then go right ahead. We're talking about Rana a lot in this video, but another interesting discovery happened with her earlier this week with the release of update 1.13. With this update came many secret changes that were not listed in the patch notes, one of which caught a lot of attention online, and that is that they secretly added a chair to her arena. I know, crazy. But while it may seem insignificant, it actually fits the theme quite well. Even though this chair in the arena did not exist before Tuesday of this week, it should look very familiar to you. That's because this chair is the same kind that can be found in the Royal Moongazing Grounds in Loretta's.
To się super wiąże, bo cały ten fakt, że Relana jest siostrą Renali i mają obie związek z Księżycem, z obserwatoriami swoimi, że mają związek z karyjskim rodem, ale jedna go porzuciła i te swoje przekonania i całą rodzinę, tak naprawdę pomagając Mesmerowi, nie wiem, spoko to jest.
And you may be wondering, well, why do they have so many chairs surrounding this giant pool of thin water? It's in the name of the arena, the Royal Moongazing Grounds. This pool is thin as to create a reflection of the stars above, and therefore the moon, in an act called scrying, a form of divination to tell fortunes, or in Elden Ring's case, read the fate in the stars. But since Rana abandoned her Carian namesake to follow...
Zarąbiste w sumie, nie? Siedzisz sobie nad tą wodą, odbijają ci się gwiazdy, księżyc i z tego coś tam czytasz. Fajne, lorowo.
Mesmer, it makes sense that she would only have one chair, as there were no other Carian royals to join her. As seemingly insignificant as this chair is, I think it holds a pretty interesting reality and a deeper look into Rana's story. Now, here's something pretty crazy. Did you know that Elden Ring's DLC actually has its own secret New Game Plus? Apparently, if you beat Radahn, then a secret modifier applies, making the rest of the DLC harder. Now, I had absolutely no idea about this, and it seems the vast majority of players didn't either. Well, some people noticed at the bottom of Fextra Life's wiki page about the DLC, they have this little indent, DLC Plus. On top of the New Game Plus cycle, the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC gets more challenging in your first New Game Plus cycle after beating Promised Consort Radahn. All enemies' health bars are increased and the damage they deal increases as well. The DLC Plus increase is permanent for a save file, but it only happens once. So you're either in DLC Plus because you started a new game after beating the DLC, or you're not. Now after reading...
Ty, jak zabijesz Radahna, gra się staje trudniejsza. Tak o, po cichu. Ale numer.
That I thought this might be some kind of confusion going on, and this wasn't actually a real feature. But
Tego nie miałem pojęcia.
Put this to the test, stating that they duplicated their save file, having one version with the modifier and one without. He then took these characters to Mesmer and compared the damage, stating that they had significantly different results. So for the character that had not beaten Radahn before, Mesmer's opening attack did roughly 1300 damage. But for the exact same character that did beat Radahn, that attack did almost 1500 damage. So we're looking at about a 12% increase in damage with this modifier. So that is fascinating. Of course, there are a lot of variables, but commenters under that post shared a chart that actually documents this change. And you can see that the multipliers are higher at the earlier points of the DLC and narrow off slightly towards the end. Now, I'm gonna be honest, I don't know how to perfectly read what we're looking at here. I'm just going off what's been said by people that have. I'll have a link to the post in the description if you want further details.
Własny New Game Plus na DLC wewnętrzny.
Ciekawe. Secret difficulty, unbeknownst to the player, and say absolutely nothing about it. But those are 8 things that you probably didn't know about Elden Ring DLC.
No to ostatnie najciekawsze, szczerze. Autentycznie najciekawsze zostało na koniec. Bardzo, bardzo interesujące, że jest własny New Game Plus. No nic, kolejna dawka, moi drodzy, ciekawostek. Dodali krzesło, można zcheezować Relanę. Bikela nie ma ręki, dzięki za info. Bardzo spoko materiał.